And what if it doesn't work? That's okay. What if it does work? Well, maybe that'll be good. I don't know. But I've always felt that if you give yourself permission to do something and you explore the what if, not blindly and, massive risk, but a sort of a considered, informed risk taking to go, what if I did this that had, enough thought around it that could take me somewhere? I can almost guarantee doors will open that you'd never considered, mainly because you will move yourself into a territory or a space or a community that you would not have normally done had you not given yourself the permission to say, what if? What if I do this?
Today in the Living in Alignment podcast, we had Kevin Finn, who is someone I met 2 years ago when we crossed paths at the stage of the design conference. Kevin is a brand expert, author, international recognized branding designer, and a TEDx speaker. His personal belief is that there is wisdom in learning. Kevin has over 30 years of experience, beginning his career in Dublin, Ireland, in a design studio that has created all of U2's album covers. Following this, he was joint creative director of Saatchi's Design in Sydney, part of the Saatchi's and Saatchi's global network. And in 2007, he founded the Zoom Off. Finn lives and works in the turbulent Jagera people and acknowledged Australia's first people as the original knowledge holders of this country in Australia, paying respects to elders both past and present. Today, I talked to Kevin about his knowledge, but also how can you give yourself permission? How can you embrace curiosity? I really believe you're going to thoroughly enjoy this episode, and I cannot wait for you to let me know what you thought about it. Enjoy. Kevin, you're here.
I'm here. It's early in the morning for you. It's early in the afternoon for me, but I'm here.
I know. After all this time, this has been 2 years in the making, I think, since we met at the and I remember you very kindly approached me off the back of me doing an intention setting, and you said, and and I didn't know who you were at the time, honest, but you're a very famous person
I am
in the
not.
Eastern world.
I am not. No. But I think that's a really nice way to start, because I think what happened that time at the design conference in Brisbane is that what you were doing on stage, I really gravitated to what you were doing, but you as a person. And you made me feel really welcome to just come up and talk to you and have that conversation that we had, which started us being in contact,
Yeah, amazing. So glad that we crossed paths. So Kevin, you introduce yourself to a normal person that you ever meet. What would you say to them?
These days I say that I'm sort of a brand specialist or brand expert, an author, a designer, and a speaker. That's how I would describe myself. I would also probably just put a context around that and say that I sort of navigate the world through the prism of design. So whether it's talking to businesses, whether it's talking to just general people, whether I'm talking to my son, I navigate the world through design, and I'll put a sort of an explainer around that. I had the good fortune to have spent time with Edward de Bono, who I would classify as the godfather of design thinking, even though he wasn't saying those things. That's been the foundation. And I once asked him for his definition of design, and he gave me 3 words: design is deliberate. And I went, that makes so much sense. So whether I'm trying to talk to my son about some, life lesson or what he should and shouldn't be doing, whether I'm working with businesses or if I'm on a stage talking, it's designed deliberately to get to an outcome. And that's kind of how I navigate the world. Kind of sounds a bit maybe shallow and wanky, but it's actually more a case of being conscious of what I'm doing, why I'm doing it, and how I'm doing it. And that's what I think design is.
Yeah. I resonate with that quote, and I know that you've been very involved with the Edward Bono Foundation, and in fact developed the brand, new branding, which looks fantastic. And I know that was a bit of a process in itself.
It was a process, yeah, 2-year process, and Yeah, it was amazing. It was for Debono Global, but that was his management company. But unfortunately, he's passed away a couple of years back. So, but yeah, I was very fortunate to spend time with him and have many conversations with him.
Incredible. I stumbled upon design thinking when I started my business. And I was doing customer experience and,
Mm,
journey maps and customer personas. And little did I know about the world thinking. And I remember I started using it in my business. And I think what resonated with me was what you're saying is that sense of consciousness and understanding, but deep empathy
yeah,
about problem, the potential assumptions on the solutions we could have, but also the people that we were developing for, we were designing for. And
mm,
I think that was really fascinating for me as I was coming from a space of, the corporate world that was very much around solution making. And all of a sudden I
mm,
was there with a
mm,
problem or
yep,
and I had to empathize at such a deep level that I had to really go inside of myself to stop myself from really jumping into mode.
mm.
I'm really understanding things at a much deeper level. And I really believe design thinking changed my life. Like it really did back in the
Wow,
day, it did. And
yeah,
I was teaching it to 100 people. And to this
yeah,
day, I really believe design thinking can be used in a corporate environment. Design thinking can be used, as you're saying, with your son at home to design your
mm,
life, like Vince
yep,
Frost does in his book,
yes.
design your life, right? So,
Hmm. Yeah, it's really interesting because I have a love-hate relationship with design thinking because I believe it's been made more complicated than it needs to be.
yes.
I believe that some people, designers or consultants, have jumped on to if we can make this full of graphs and charts and lots of post-it notes and lots of complicated stuff, then people will think that this is important. And I
Mm,
think it misses that thing that Edward said. It's about literally using some frameworks and some conscious thinking to deliberately design to an outcome that the big difference for me is in traditional kind of corporate space or traditional business is as it was once described to me before is it's very analytical. It looks to
mm,
the past and what has been done, how it's been done before, and let's make that more efficient or let's replicate that. And where I think design thinking opened it up was it included how designers think and we think into the future into
mm,
what if it could be this? And that is a scary space for business owners. It's a scary place for people who don't feel they're creative or don't understand the design process because the design process is quite messy and quite haphazard. And I think what design thinking has done is helped the business world get more comfortable with that.
mm,
And I think the reason that they've become more comfortable for that is not necessarily because it's more tangible or there's frameworks. I think because it primarily came out of the business schools like Stanford and that, and that for them has currency. Whereas if it came out of the design schools, they'd go, "Oh, that's all designery stuff. That's nothing to do with business." So I
yeah.
think that's probably the sort of where I feel that the true core of design thinking has really benefited the business world is being comfortable with the uncomfortable, feeling safe in a process that gets you to an outcome deliberately and consciously. And the thing that I feel that I probably most resonated with design thinking is T-shaped thinking.
Mm,
So you've got the top of the T is this is the width and the breadth of your knowledge. So we're constantly looking across culture, across politics, across popular culture, across as many things as we can, and then bringing it into our vertical, which is our expertise, and that just brings in influences that the design traditional design education doesn't necessarily do. We're really much entrenched in our own field, whereas
yeah.
T-shaped thinking says get out and see as much as you can and bring that to your field. So they're kind of the two things for design thinking that I've really felt were probably the most significant contributions to the business world.
Mm,
Um, and I just scratch my head when designers and consultants try and make that more complicated. But what I have also seen, I'm not sure if we're jumping the gun here, but the whole connection from design thinking and human-centered design, for
mm,
me, that's shifted, and it's shifted primarily because of Bruce Mao, the visionary designer, Canadian designer, and I've had this struggled with this human-centered design framework for a
Right.
long time, but I didn't quite know why until Bruce articulated it. And I went, that's what I've been bothered about. Human-centered design puts us at the center of everything, and I have a
Yeah.
problem with that. Whereas what Bruce says is we need to be thinking of life-centered design, and we need to be thinking in ecosystems, not just in sort of business how we said the narrow needs of a business to achieve their marketing goals. I
Mm.
think we need and their profit line. I think we need to be looking at the ripple effect of what a business does and how that affects all life. And that sounds big and complicated and scary and possibly idealistic, but particularly moving into the 21st century, we're now looking at how a business makes decisions in their supply chain could either A, pollute the environment and then have drastic economic fallout for that country or that community, or it could be that they have a negative impact. They're not really thinking about what their business does further out into the ecosystem.
Yeah.
And then you've got very talented people who want to work in companies and decide to choose a different company who isn't putting a negative impact in the world
Mm.
versus somebody else who is, because that's now the war for talent. How do you attract and retain the best and brightest? So this is just kind of some of the more tangibles when we talk about life-centered design or ecosystem thinking. People can dismiss it as, oh, that's big and leftist and socialist and idealist. But when we start to put a business case underneath that, we start putting tangibles of where the impact of those decisions can show up,
Yeah.
and we start having very interesting conversations.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry,
I
we took that into a bit of
No,
a wild direction.
not at all. This is so pertinent to this conversation, and I really believe that what you're mentioning, Kevin, around the ethical factors that I call it. Those
Yep,
are, for me, that's what I call it. I remember when we were doing with my consultancy at the time, a lot of work with clients on projects and end-to-end, so thinking
yep,
base project work. And one of the things that you do is you look whether it's viable, whether it's feasible, what's desirable. And I
correct.
remember I was like, something in here. And it wasn't rocket science, but for me, it was like, well, there's an ethical factor here. We can do all these incredible things, but what is that going to look like from the impact that goes beyond, not just right now, but in the future? The typical
Yeah,
example of like how China grew to be such a successful country, but to the extent of pollution. And
yep,
so you start really thinking about these things. And I think, especially now that entrepreneurs are being much more opinion purpose driven, business are really thinking of
mm,
that conjunction of impact.
yep.
I'm finding it really interesting how this conversation, other ecosystem about, how that's really converging. Is that is that where you think businesses are going, Kevin, or do you still think that there's a lot of, you know, not caring about those ecosystem factors?
I think we're in a transition point. There's a couple of factors that lead me to be optimistic, though.
Mm.
So first of all, this conversation that you've just raised here is now far closer to the mainstream than it used to be.
Mm.
So all of a sudden, this isn't a fringe conversation. This is like a central conversation. And we're talking about some of the biggest companies and brands in the world who are having this conversation about what their impact is, whether it is, and I've got case studies from Aldi in the UK, or we know about Lego, and we know about BlackRock, the venture capital, the asset management company. So we're talking about the big end of town. They're right across on this. We also have had a lot of spectacular failures in the purpose sort of driven companies who've been caught up in the Kool-Aid of purpose and not having a business case around it and not
Mm.
having a tangible business model that allows for that to be sustainable. And we can see that we can get the lessons from that and go, okay, we need to be looking at this not as a feel good thing. We need to be thinking of it as a business case. So that's interesting. The other interesting thing that's happening is, and I just saw this the other day as well, where our generation, you and I, we've kind of become aware of these important issues around ecosystems and about sustainability and about having a positive impact in the world, and that the generations coming behind us, they were born into that. They
Mm.
were born into, you guys, not maybe our generation, but the generations ahead of us have mishandled our future. And we are very acutely aware of that. And for a long time, millennials were a punch bag for jokes of, but here's the interesting thing. They are now in the workforce. They are now in governments. They are now, because they've matured, they're at an age where they're leading businesses, they are leading society, and they're making decisions based on entirely different criteria than the generations ahead. And the criteria that they're making decisions on align with what you and I have been talking about, this ecosystem way of thinking, this positive impact, this we need to be running not just sustainable businesses and sustainable societies, but we need to be thinking in ecosystems to ensure that that is protected and that it can sustain not just in terms of environmental sustainability, but sustain itself economically. So I'm optimistic that there's enough people in positions of power or soon to be that come from this space that the transition will maybe expedite, maybe accelerate soon.
Mm.
But there's enough happening at the moment where there's big organizations who are making the shift. The other side of that too is that it's now becoming business survival. So they know that if they're getting a negative impact in the world, that customers will not transact with them, staff won't work for them, media is going to call them out. So there's a sort of protecting survivalist thing, and whether they're moving with the herd or whether they're doing the right thing, to me, it doesn't really matter because the outcome is the same. The outcome is that we're all moving in this direction. And there's plenty of examples of people who aren't moving in that direction. That's fine. But I think they are not the lone voices anymore. There's plenty of other voices in the business world that are actually doing things that would resonate with the conversation you and I are having now.
I wonder how those very creative individuals, who really feel that they want to become, let's say, an entrepreneur or start a business or startup, or they might even be an entrepreneur within an organization. And I'm very much thinking of, your book, Kevin, on brand principles, where you talk about, all the questions about the values you provide, the problem you're solving, then,
Mm.
what can you live up to it, which is
Yep.
something you talk about as well.
Yep.
Which you have that beautiful, also for those listening, that very beautiful and brief, very summarized version of your brand principles book on Canva, on the Canva side, which I love
Oh
and
yes. Yeah.
simplified. It's amazing. I was like, how can your brand principle book be summarized in such an amazing way? But you did it. Fantastic.
Thank you.
And I wonder how that ecosystem that we're talking about, those ethical principles, can really
Mm.
start being considered. Because I find that, when we're looking at the branding side of things, we talk about values and mission and purpose statements. And I think that's what really comes in. But when it comes to the model,
Mm.
I find that sometimes that could not be combined. And I
Yeah.
think it will mean that someone, say, that hasn't done it before, it will need to work, say, with someone like yourself that's got that knowledge, or they really need to slow the process down to really go, hang on here. Like, what do we need to do to really make the world a better place while still
Yeah. Yeah. I think and there's a lot to unpack there, but I think the key thing would be most startups are incredibly passionate about their mission and incredibly passionate about what they see as business as a force for good. And they see that, and that's all the purpose led or ethical led or impact led organizations and startups. I think that's great. What they tend to lose though is because that's all kind of up in the sky stuff, and they lose the grounding of tangible business. So I think if you're a startup and you're very mission orientated or purpose or impact driven, I think you need to have that balance now of keep the passion alive and be very clear, and then have the grounding of a business person who understands the passion, who understands the dream, but comes at it from a very practical point of view to say, how do we now make this actually work? What is our plan a year from today, 2 years from today, 5 years from today? How are we going to create a sustainable revenue model for us to keep doing what we want to do? I think if you've got that balance, you're off to a good start. The other thing that I always find funny, and indulge me on this, particularly startups will start talking about themselves as a brand. And I'm like, okay. So you don't have a product in the market or a service. You don't really have a business, but you've got an idea and you're a brand. Okay. So we've got this confusion between what a brand is and what branding is. So I think when I'm talking to startups, I get them to understand that very quickly, that, your logo and your website is not your brand. That's just a way that you're reflecting yourself today. And they need to really understand what it takes to become a brand. And I don't think that startups even need to be hoping to become a brand. I say, if you've got a brand mindset that says, here's how we do things from a business point of view, from a vision point of view, from a mission point of view, from values, internal, external, the works. If you got that brand mindset, then it doesn't matter if you become a brand or not. What matters is that you are in a position with your business branding and your dreams and passion direction that you can create a business model that will sustain the passion that you want to bring to the world. So that's kind of how I talk to the startup world, or young businesses who get really excited about the passion but don't have the business acumen. At the same time, if you're talking to a startup that's just all about the business acumen, then I say, how are you going to differentiate yourself? Where's the vision? Where's the passion? Where you show up in the world and how you bring that value to other people?
Yeah.
And without the two of them, it struggles. And most startups are leaning toward the passion side, the vision side, the big idea. Now, a really good example, and there's an amazing documentary on Netflix. I'm not trying to endorse Netflix, but it just happens to be on Netflix. And it's called Big Vape. And if you haven't seen it and your listeners, go watch it. It is an incredible, condensed case study of really passionate young entrepreneurs coming out of, I think it was Stanford, who wanted to end smoking. Just what an amazing big challenge. Yeah. And then they decided that, well, what if we create something that would replace that? And this is before vaping, but they were creating what became vapes. But you see the arc of what's the vision and the passion? Great. What's the business model and the business grounding that will ensure that it's sustainable? That's great. Where it goes wobbly, and this is what startups and businesses should see, is when you start to compromise on your decisions as you go through your journey, and it starts to undermine your values and your passion and your reason and your mission, and you get taken to places that in the end of this documentary is the last place that they wanted to be. And it just shows how the wheels come off, and it shows it kind of in a timeline of what was happening. They talked to staff in terms of the values they had, that they had to compromise and start to excuse, and okay, well, maybe we're not doing this, but we could be doing this instead. And you just look at it and go, oh my gosh, I'm sure this happens so many times. So as a trajectory for a purpose-led startup that did have a business grounding eventually, you can see even then how the wheels come off if you don't stay the course, if you don't stay true to yourself. And if part of that is if you're not clear at the beginning. So there's kind of three things that I see for any business, but it really helps with startups. There's three things that are going to really help. One, clarity. Be absolutely clear about who you are, what you're about, what you're trying to do. So that clarity. And if you've got a group of people, make sure you're all aligned around that clarity. So these guys in the documentary, they had that. B, focus. When you've got that clarity, focus on it. They did focus, but they lost focus, and they kind of moved into the third area too quickly and without staying true to their clarity and their values. The third is visibility. So if you got the clarity and you got the focus, you need the visibility that people see what you're about. You get awareness, and people know who you are, and then they can decide whether they want to transact with you or not. So they're kind of the three things. And if you lose focus or lose focus is one of them. If you lose some ground on any of those
Mm.
three things, you start to get into a bit of trouble, I think.
Yeah. And I wonder, like, obviously, without ruining the show, because I'm going to watch it, the
Mm.
documentary about why did that focus started coming quite boldly, as you call it. This is something that we see the word
Yep.
pull into different directions, where they may need to,
Yep.
where they may co-founders too many decisions. Do they lose the human centered
Yep.
versus the profit side of things? And I think so many factors can come in play. And I wonder, even if in the design process, there could be really, I don't know, like almost like a check-in. It's like, are
Yep.
we tracking? Okay, let's keep going. Do we pivot? What we do, right? We pivot with perish, or we stop. And I wonder if that could be.
There's two things that stood out to me, and I won't be giving anything away. The first was greed,
Mm,
and the second was vanity.
mm,
So there was a lot of ego. Yeah, there was ego, and that became a grenade in the team,
mm,
in the founders. Egos, but greed really pushed them. And the vanity side of it is they were getting so much attention for the wrong things that they got caught up in their own attention and
right.
lost sight of where they started. And look, it's very easy for me to sit here and critique them and criticize them. I think this documentary spans a number of years. So as they go through the years, they're further away from that vision that they had, and they
Mm,
start making compromises, and they rationalize why they're doing one thing over another, and things change, etc.,
yeah.
etc. But when you see it condensed in a documentary, you can just see that arc of greed coming in, vanity, ego. I think to have that mechanism of
Mm,
we've got to keep checking in with why we're doing this. We've got to keep checking in with why we're doing what we're doing and what we hope to achieve. And we gotta listen to our team who
mm,
might be telling us that we're going off range and what we need to do about that. So I think again, being clear, being focused and being visible is gonna propel people into the market, into the world. But I think we also need to have that humility and vulnerability to listen to those who are saying this might not be aligned to where you've come from. Maybe you just want to take a breath and go back
mm,
to where you started and just see if you're on the same path. And I always say that no matter what decisions we have, we've got two ways to go. A, we will not change because this is who we are, and we're willing to give up a lucrative opportunity because it doesn't fit with who we are. Or B, lucrative opportunity, we're going to take this, is going to make us retire, make us comfortable, whatever it might be. As long as you then acknowledge we've changed and this is who we are now. What I see too often is taking that second path and pretending you're on the other path.
yeah.
So it's like a little bit of column A, a little column B, but they're leaning to column B. And I say, you need to acknowledge that you have shifted and your values have shifted. And that's fine. That is
Mm,
not it's not the devil's work. It's like, just acknowledge that we were here and now we're here for whatever reason,
yeah. Yeah.
and just go with it. So maybe communication is a big thing, internal
Yeah.
communication.
I think integrity comes in
Mm.
play as well. Integrity has been a big word for me. And I'm never that person that, starts the new year and goes, this is the word for the year, because I always do it.
Yeah. What was that word again?
It's like, what
Yeah,
was I
yeah,
supposed to do this year? Was I supposed to be
yeah,
joyful, happy? Was I?
yeah, 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 yeah,
But integrity has been a big word for me. I think for
yeah,
for a lot of people in the world right now, witnessing the pain that is taking place in so many parts of the world,
yeah,
currently in Palestine, and that has really affected me.
yeah,
And I'm in a very privileged position as a person, as a mom, as a someone. And
mm,
however, it has affected me to an extent that has affected my business. It has affected how I shop. If you
mm,
call it, I don't see myself as a personal brand, but you could say, well, people may. And I
mm,
am going up integrity, and a
yeah,
lot of there is a lot of obviously bigger organizations that, it's almost like a Titanic. For them to move with integrity, they have to move this big piece, communication and
yeah,
how they show up with their values. But integrity has been a big thing for me. And I want to touch on that for a second.
mm,
When you and I were talking last week about your very beginnings as a creative director at Saatchi's and Saatchi's, and this is where I'm going with this integrity, sitting in history. You were 29 years old and Saatchi's and Saatchi, and take us from
Mm.
there. Your life wasn't really in alignment, I
Well,
suppose. Yeah.
I always remember when I was at Saatchi's, and to the listeners, I was the joint creative director of Saatchi Design, part of the Saatchi and Saatchi network in Sydney. And I remember saying that the smallest part of a difficulty in working at Saatchi's was getting the job. That was the smallest part, and that was hard. The rest was earning the right to be there. That's how I showed up every day. I was like, I felt amazed that I managed to get this role at Saatchi's in Sydney, coming from a small town in the west coast of Ireland. Here I am in Sydney in Saatchi and Saatchi in this amazing role. And I always said to myself, the easiest part was getting the job, which is so hard. And the hardest part is earning it every day. Um, and that wasn't putting pressure on myself. That was just making sure that I was constantly reminding myself that it's not coasting from here on. The hard part is to show up every day and do your best. So that was one thing. So with that in mind, at this time I was 29 and I was in one of these big boardrooms in Saatchi and Saatchi, and we had all of our best work up on the wall to A, celebrate our work, B, it was like a new business thing for potential clients, and C, to educate the agency about design. So we had a kind of a three-pronged reason for that. And we had just won a D&AD yellow pencil out of London, which is like the Oscars of design and advertising. And that gave us some credibility, gave us some authority. We were on a high. And I remember standing in that room. I can see it now in my head. I'm standing in that room. We're setting up. So there was just a few people in the room and there's work everywhere. And I thought to myself, crap, here I am at a position I never thought I'd be in. And if I ever did sort of think I might be in this position, I would be 60 plus. I'm not 29. How the hell am I here? And in that moment, I looked ahead into the future and I saw this treadmill of, well, I'm at this peak. It's kind of the top of the mountain. Where else do you go? My life now is going to be get a brief, do the best work you can, see if you can win an award. Get a brief, do the best. Oh my God, this is a conveyor belt, a treadmill. I don't want to be on this. I got to get the hell out. So at the peak of my time at Saatchi's, having just won a D&AD yellow pencil, having started to maybe make a bit of a profile on the industry because of Saatchi's, I'm saying I got to get out. I'm done because it's downhill from here, or it's
Was your
coasting.
ego totally beaten up? Like, what was your ego doing?
No. My ego was like, wow, you've made it.
Yeah.
Wow. Now you go do something else, because I think I saw the potential to get bored really quickly, and I was like, I don't want that to be a blemish on this amazing peak that I'm at right now. I just need to quit while I'm ahead, you know. And I was 2.5 years at Saatchi's at the time. So I was like, wow, this is just stupid. What am I doing? I got to get out. But then I started to think, well, if I get out and I've got to go do another career, what would that be? And then I've got to go study it for a few years and then go from the ground back up again, bottom rung. And that could be 10 years. And wow, all right, do I want to do that? So I made a decision there and then to say, well, instead of leaving the industry, I was going to go to the heart of it and question it. And that's when I said, maybe, possibly, this is the time that the idea that I've had for 8 years that I didn't give myself permission to pursue, maybe I should do that. And that's when I decided pretty much there and then that I was going to do a publication called Open Manifesto. And this is back in 2004. So back then, this wasn't a very sexy conversation, but I was really interested in saying, I want to explore where design intersects with social, cultural, political, and economic issues, because that to me is questioning my field. And I don't want to go and talk about the work. I want to talk about the thinking behind the people who do the work. And I don't want this to be designers talking to designers about design. I want to talk to designers and other people outside our field to see what they think about design. And that to me was like a professional research project that took 15 years, 18 years, but it saved my career. because I was like 1 foot out the door at Saatchi's going, once this exhibition is done, I'm leaving the industry, not the company, the industry. So that was one of those two things that made me do Up Manifesto. That was one of the main ones. There's another small thing that was reading a magazine cover to cover, and I went, that's it, I'm doing this.
Yeah. I I, I know that a lot of these changes that we make decisions. It is really that thread that we were talking about last week when we were connecting about this episode was around giving.
Yeah.
And I think with that is giving yourself permission to giving yourself permission
Yep.
giving yourself permission to, I don't know, reinvent yourself every 7 years. We change constantly. Our brain,
Yep.
our our behaviors keep adapting to the ecosystem that we keep talking about. And so
Mm,
I think that giving yourself permission can be quite a scary
mm,
conversation to be self.
mm.
Because, in hand, as you said, I've studied, I've made it. And all of a
Yeah.
sudden here I'm saying, what the F? I need to
Yep.
get out of here and
Yep.
reinvent myself. But that's a really scary conversation. When I had to do it, when I did all the
Mm,
things, a good girl does. I went to university, I
yep.
got the best jobs, I had to work for the best brands, and I moved to
Mm,
London to be able to speak English. And I was there and I worked for Microsoft, and I was like, amazing, had two babies, and I was like, I don't want to do this, miserable. And I
yeah.
don't. But making that decision was so scary. And even now, when I think I was telling you about it the other day, was, there's still this part of me that has this incredible baggage, consulting baggage, corporate
Yep.
baggage, strategy, speaking, all the things. But there is this other part of me that is constantly emerging and constantly trying to come out. It's like, Ali, I'm here. Don't forget about me. And
Yep.
that's that part that was to work on purpose-driven projects, maybe something more on the conscious and a spiritual side of things. And I
Mm,
think we need to think of that. I really think as a society and as individuals, we really need to think about how can I give myself permission to
yep.
still have the practical things that
Mm,
I need. I need to pay my bills. I need to feed my
yep.
dog and kids. But I can also seek that alignment, which for me is the alignment of your soul, is your purpose, is your passion, is the work that you are meant to be doing lifetime. And I
Mm,
think that's you were at that crossroad, and a lot of people are in that crossroad.
yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's two things that stand out to me there that you said. I agree with everything you said, but two things that stand out is, yes, since COVID particularly, everyone's changed, or a lot of people have changed. But the other thing that is more important than that is that the world has changed. So the world has changed in tandem with everybody else. So working's different. What people are pursuing is different. Values are different. And the medical sector is now seen differently. I mean, everything's different, right? So I
Mm,
think not only have we all changed from COVID, and it breaks my heart to think that something of a positive catalyst for change, which was COVID, is also been detrimental to people, their family. They've lost businesses, they've lost family members, they've lost lives. So
yeah.
it's this real disruption
Mm,
in everyone's world. But out of that, the world has changed.
mm,
And then that takes me to permission. So where does that fit with how the world's changed? And we start talking about permission. It comes back to beginning of our conversation today about design thinking. Permission in a sort of a way that might take away some of that fear is leaning into that design thinking sense of what if, that designer's mentality of, well, what if? And I think if I sort of transport myself back to my time at Saatchi's in that room, thinking about Open Manifesto, it literally was a question of what if? What if I did it? And what if it doesn't work? That's okay. What if it does work? Well, maybe that'll be good. I don't know. But
mm,
I've always felt that if you give yourself permission to do something and you explore the what if, not blindly and, massive risk, but a sort of a considered, informed risk taking to go, what if I did this that
mm,
had, enough thought around it that could take me somewhere? I can almost guarantee, asterisks, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a, but I could almost guarantee doors will open that you'd never considered, mainly because you will move yourself into a territory or a space or a community that you would not have normally done had you not given yourself the permission to say, what if? What
Yeah.
if I do this? And I think the way to try in 2024 onwards, the way to try and embrace that permission structure is to try, first of all, to quieten that voice in your head to say you're not good enough. Because I had that. I said, I'm not an editor. I'm not a publisher. I'm not a writer. I've never interviewed anybody. Who the hell am I? And I'm not an expert in this area of where design shows up in the world. But I had something that a gentleman called Simon Pemberton said to me. And it was after the second interview I ever did. And that interview was with a gentleman called Stefan Sagmeister, one of the top designers in the world out of New York. He was in Sydney doing a talk, and I had arranged to interview him after the talk in the back room. So I did. And I fumbled my way through it. And Stefan was incredibly gracious and kind and generous with making me feel like I knew what I was talking about. And afterwards, Stefan left the room and it was just me in the room. And I was like, clearly questioning why I was doing this. And Simon Pemberton walked in. He was the head of the school at the time at Billy Blue. And he looked at me and he said, "You okay?" And I said, "Simon, I don't know why I'm doing this. I'm not qualified for this. I mean, someone else should be talking to Stefan, not me." And Simon just looked at me and he said, "You know what? You'll do it your way, and that's enough." And it was that moment that I thought, he's right. I need to give myself permission not just to do the project, not just to take this path, not just to entertain the what if, but to really, really understand that I need to give myself the permission to do it my way, whatever that looks like, and be comfortable with saying, I don't want to measure myself against somebody else because they're doing it their way. I'm going to do it my way. And I'm going to see where that takes me. And the final thing I'll say on that was I had a really, really clear understanding from day one when I was doing that project, to say this is an investment, but not just an investment in time and money and, energy and that. I said, this is an investment in myself. I'm going to invest in myself by giving myself permission to explore a what if in the way that I think I might want to do it. And that is enough. That little package helps us get through this uncertainty, the imposter syndrome, stopping ourselves before we even give ourselves permission to give it a go because we're afraid we'll fail. We just go, well, what if it doesn't work? But where will that take me? If not in the world, in here, in my mind, in my knowledge, in how I've learned. And that was kind of how I managed to get through all of that doubt.
That's huge. I mean, that's huge, Kevin, because that sense of curiosity is a
Mm,
driver, it's a value. It's almost like that's my, that's my saving line. If anything happens, curiosity would hold me and held the
mm,
process. There is so much self-doubt that could come and creep in throughout.
yeah.
And I'm sure that happened to you and you had to remind yourself, what if? Let's keep being curious. Let's keep being open-minded about the process. And I think I find that, for a lot of the people that probably be listening to the podcast and the people that you and I talk to on the daily, they are
Mm,
very creative, very attuned, very sensitive people. I
mm,
really truly believe the people in our industry are very sensitive. They sense differently.
yeah.
And because of that, it could come a lot of that. It could come a lot of that. Am I
Mm,
don't someone else can do it better or someone else has done it. And I love
yeah.
that you're talking about this because I really think we all need to hear what you just said. We need to do it our way. It's like I'm
Yeah.
currently working on a project that already sort of exists in many shapes and forms. And I'm like, who am I? Ali, come on, seriously, don't waste your time. And that's my ego. Like, well, you just even help me to understand I could do it my way. And that's enough. I think
Yeah.
that there's a lot of people that will resonate with my way. And that's
Yeah.
okay too.
There's something else, particularly with Open Manifesto, but a lot of other things that I've tried to explore and pursue is if we do everything that I've just sort of outlined, but then tell ourselves whatever we learn, we want to share it with other people. that to me was a very important thing. Is that I know this is an investment in myself. I know that all the things I explore and the things I try and learn, if I keep it to myself, it
Mm,
feels really selfish.
mhm.
And it also feels like it makes me the source of knowledge and the source of, whatever. This where the ego comes in. And I say, actually, no, it's the opposite. It's
Yeah.
almost like, hey, anybody who's listening, if it's one person, 100 people, 1,000 people or more, I just learned this. And I think you might
Yeah.
find it interesting.
Yeah.
So this idea of sharing and the
Mm,
generosity is something that was also underpinning not just Open Manifesto, but when I do whatever I do, it's like, how can I share this with
mm.
people to see if it adds value to them?
Yeah.
I think that comes back to, as designers, we're empathetic. We're trying to understand the world through the eyes of a creative, but I think it's not enough just to do that. I think we need to understand our experience in the world as creatives or as designers, as people,
Mm,
and then sharing that with other people to see if they can fast track their way, or if they can use bits of what we learned to help them get to where they need to get to. So this
yeah.
idea of sharing and being generous and being open
Mm,
is also something that underpins it, and it actually takes away the pressure of having to be the person who's the absolute expert in this
yeah.
pursuit that you're doing. You go, I'm just figuring shit out, and I'm going to tell you, maybe you'll do it better than me. Great, we can help each other. That was kind of the humility of saying, I just learned this, maybe it'll help you. That I think is also part and parcel of giving yourself that permission structure.
I wrote it down last week when we chatted. It was generosity plus humility equals giving permission. That humility of
Yeah,
100%.
yeah. Finding your own voice, because particularly in the era of social media where we're measuring ourselves against a fabricated, manufactured plastic, the world's beautiful through social media posts, and we know that's not true, but
Mm,
yet we still measure ourselves against everybody else's success. And I think we need to be realistic and say, well, one, who are we measuring ourselves against and why?
mm,
And, you know, what is it that for me or for you or for all of us, when we're looking at giving ourselves permission, we say, in my own little world, in my own little lane, my own little pursuit that I'm going after, what does success look like? And
yeah.
how would I measure that? And once you've got your measurement for what you think success looks like in your pursuit, you don't need to look at anybody else and measure of whether you're succeeding in their eyes. And the truth is, they're probably not even looking at you anyway. So who cares?
Yeah.
So you just
Yeah.
got to say, how am I measuring this? And what does success look like for me? And how can I get there? Because that would make me happy.
Yeah.
And then you might get there quicker than you expected. And then you go, well, success looks different for me now because it looks like it's scaled or bigger or in a different direction. And now I got to
Mm,
pursue that. But more often than not, we don't give ourselves permission. We listen to the voice in our head that says, you're not good enough, or who the hell are you? Or it's not going to work. So why bother trying?
yeah.
And I always think, I have this little phrase that those who try and don't succeed, at least they've conquered fear, because the fear stops us and we don't try because we think we're not going to succeed. And even if we try and we don't succeed, we've won. We've conquered fear. That'll help us the next time.
It's so true. I always say we're gonna hit fear in the face, like in many
Yeah,
ways.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
really interesting how for me, I don't know for you, fear shows up in me. Obviously, my nervous system gets very dysregulated. I'm a fight or flight. But I can now that I am a fear master in the sense that I live in fear, but that's
yeah.
because
Okay.
I'm a very
Yeah,
analytical person. I'm an
yeah.
over analytical person. I'm always thinking about pros and cons. And I have ADHD, so my fear response is a bit higher than for most people. For me, rejection is like, oh, I don't know, be rejected. That would be the worst thing that could ever happen.
Yeah.
But one thing that I've noticed, and I know patterns is something that you talk about quite a lot. And one of the patterns that I started understanding is that when something feels actually quite physical in my body, feels between my chest and
Yeah.
my belly, is fear for something that is actually gonna, number one, get me out of my comfort zone, but number two is gonna make myself grow to a space that I could be just on my purpose. And I
Yep.
know I know now what that feels like. And it's such an incredible feeling. And I really
Mm.
would love for everybody to even
Yep.
try to even think about, does this fear feel like fear? I'm going to die if I cross the road when the traffic is this fear that I'm feeling in this moment for this project that excites me. I know I can do it. I know our ways, but I can
Yep.
figure it out. Does that feel different?
Well, yeah, but I have I've got like a mechanism, or two mechanisms to sort of counter that. The first is, and this is going to sound really glib, but it's a survival mechanism. I say to myself all the time, I care enough not to care too much.
Mm,
And what that does is says to me, I'm going to put 110% into this, as much as it needs, except if it gets into my mental health or my physical health or my family, or there's a line. And if I cross that line, this isn't important enough. So I will care about it until it gets to that line, and then I'll stop caring about it because something else is more important. And that to me, I had to learn, because particularly as a designer, we used to just go right past that line. It was all about the work. It was all about the portfolio. It was all about the everything else at a cost that could be physical, mental, spiritual, relationships, whatever. So I've learned that I care enough not to care too much.
like
And I'm
that.
very, very specific about that. The other is, and it goes back to what you said about being curious. And I think in order to be curious, as a curious person, that by definition means we go into new territory. We move out of our comfort zone. We're willing to learn. If we're willing to learn, we're willing to grow. So I just try and reframe everything. When it comes to fear, I say, no, I'm curious. If it comes to, I don't know if I can do this, I go, but I'll learn. Or what if I find something? So I try with everything that if I come up against an obstacle, that's why I think I'm almost an obsessive optimist. I try and come to a situation and go, well, rather than lean into fear, because I'm a word person, even though I'm a visual designer, I'm a word person, and words are very powerful for me, and they've got meaning, obviously. But if I look at the word fear, I'll look at that scenario and I'll say, can I swap out the word fear for something else?
Mm,
And that just takes the edge off, and it makes it more exciting. So if I say fear, oh God, I got to deal with this fear and got to pump myself up. I'm going to get ready, get my battle gear on and push through. And that takes a lot of energy, mental as much as physical. But if I then say, no, I'm curious about what's behind that door, curious, and I go, oh, I'm excited. Oh, my gosh, all of a sudden my energy shifts in a different direction. And
yeah,
I'm a big believer in, um, if you get the language right, that influences your mindset. And if you get your mindset in a certain direction, that dictates your behavior
yeah,
and your actions. So I try and get the words right and the language right, then
mm,
primes my mind, that then directs my actions. And that's where I will try and separate this fear space and move it over to the curious space, so the what if space.
mm,
Doesn't mean I'm going to be less frightened. It just means it's reframed in a more positive, dynamic mental stimuli that makes me go, this could be fun. So
yeah,
I give myself permission that there could be a nice outcome or a good outcome or a learning experience
yeah,
versus a scary, I need to be careful, I need to tread
mm.
lightly with this fear thing. So that they're the kind of two things
I
that I
love that.
use as mechanisms.
I will try that. I will definitely try that on daily, Kevin. This will really help me, I
Tell me
think.
how it goes. Yeah, look, I mean, it works for me. It might not work for everybody else, but tell me how it goes.
I
Yeah.
will. I love how you're taking the word fear and replacing it for how can I learn? How can I improve? How
Mm.
can I da, da, da. So cool.
And it
Now,
comes from your word of being curious, right?
yeah,
About you being curious. So when we're curious, we're moving into new areas. So
yeah,
it's still scary, but if you lean into all the other stuff because curious or curiosity tells you and primes you to be that kind of way,
mm,
then all of a sudden how you show up is different.
yeah. Kevin, just now that we're wrapping up, curious, what would you say living in alignment?
Um, I know there's this whole kind of work-life balance philosophy out there, and um, I kind of buy into that, but at the same time I don't. I think living in alignment for me is ensuring that my day isn't filled with doing traditional work stuff, which is what I grew up with, which is what I did at uni in my first jobs. You go to work and you do all day until you finish your job. Then you go meet some friends, have dinner, go to bed, get up the next day, and you do and produce all day. I think living in alignment for me now is ensuring that I'm doing physical activity. I go to the gym 5 days a week, not to be anything other than physically active. I then spend a lot of time with my son to make sure that we've got a really good relationship. And so that's alignment for me, that I've got a relationship with my son. I then look at the work that I'm doing, and I don't want to be servile to the businesses that I work with. I want to be seen as somebody who genuinely has their best interests at heart, and I'm an advisor, and I'm happy to partner and advise with people. So I've got an alignment with the value that I have from a business point of view. And then I want to make sure that I am looking in that T-shaped sort of world, back to our design thinking. So I'm looking broadly at what's happening in the world. So I feed my mind, whether it's reading, whether it's watching stuff, popular culture, news, and then making sure that I've got sleep and enough sleep. So there's a lot of moving parts there. But for me, alignment is finding a through line for all of those to make me feel content, not exhilarated, not depressed, not the extremes. It's like content, happy. I'm happy with, even when things are looking like they're not going the best direction. I look at that again as, what am I learning? I'm content to understand what this is showing me, and let me see if I can learn and what I can use that for. I'm not a believer in fate, things happen for a reason. I'm a believer in things happen, and how we respond to them is deliberate, and we can learn from that. So I look at now, and alignment for me is just to ensure that I'm aligning myself physically, mentally in myself. I am aligning myself with knowledge of what's happening in the world. And I'm aligning myself with what is important to my son, who's 12, and not talking to him as an adult all the time, talking to him as, what's it like at your level at 12?
That. No, thank you, Kevin. I appreciate it. I ask these questions to everyone who.
Oh,
Um, where are you going next? Like, are you going to be writing a book? Are you working on anything special? Anything that you can share?
yes. There's a few things that are working at the moment. First of all, I am doing the early research stages of my next book. It's all around impact. So that's the one thing. Another thing I'm working on is resurrecting an education app that has an impact model at the heart of it, and that is something that's currently happening. It's a digital platform app at the moment, but there's ideas for it to grow bigger. And then there's another project that I'm working on, or initiative that I'm working on, which is with some friends of mine, who we're looking at what the infrastructure for autonomous flying vehicles looks like, which is a big, big thing. So 5 years ago, autonomous flying vehicles was like, yeah, but we've got a lot of flying vehicles, but there's not a lot of infrastructure for where they land, take off, and get recharged and stuff. So I'm part of a team that's actually looking at that right now at a very high level. So that's another thing I'm doing. And then I'm working with businesses where they're generally in the, what you would classify as the impact sector. So agri-tech, or there's philanthropic, kids, community stuff that I'm working on as well. So the studio still works. This is an important thing you mentioned earlier, and I'll perhaps finish on this, is that the book doesn't generate any money, and particularly a new book that hasn't even been written, right? That's number one. So you're not going to retire on that and keep the lights on. The digital platform hasn't even got off the ground yet. We're still looking at the sort of discovery stages of that, so there's no money coming in there. Both of them excite me no end. The infrastructure for the flying vehicles, that's not even funded yet. We're going through a whole range of things to set up partnerships first, so there's no money coming in there. So the fourth kind of lane is the traditional engaging with businesses, and that keeps the lights on. I think anyone who jumps into an initiative and says, I want to do this and give myself permission to what if explore this, and doesn't have a safety net that is financially there to ensure that you have the confidence to explore, and see where it's going to go, because you've got a security, financial security net beneath you. That's critical, because if you go off and do something and there's no financial security, you'll learn very quickly that the idea isn't going to have enough funding from yourself or anyone else to go off the ground. You'll be disillusioned. You'll end up getting a job somewhere, and you may blame the whole system for never giving yourself permission to do anything in the future.
Mm.
So having other avenues for revenues coming in is critical until one of the other ones replaces that revenue stream. And for now, that hasn't happened for me. But one avenue is traditional design services, working with business. The other three are vision, dreamy, big
Yeah.
ideas. And I think that's alignment for me. Yeah.
And I'm glad you touched on that, because I think there is a lot of people that, mind like, I'm just quitting my job and leaving it all, and it's like, wait, maybe experiment. I always talk about experimentation as being a big driver for testing projects and businesses and side hustles. We could call it side hustles before we
Yeah.
then leave those 9 to 5 jobs have to pursue it 100%. But yeah, I do agree, especially for those people that maybe have families at home, or, that
Yeah.
complexity.
And finally on that, if somebody listening to this is saying, well, I have a job, but I hate it, and I've got this
Mm,
other pursuit that I want to do, and that's my passion. I'd be happy if I did that. I hate this job. I say to myself and to them is, use that other job that you have as motivation to make this other thing work as a business. Use it as motivation, because when you're over here and in your passion lane and things get tricky, or it's not going according to plan, ask yourself this question: what's the alternative? And if the alternative is going back to a job you hate, then use that as a motivator to try and make this thing work, so you
mhm.
can replace the job you don't like, or the job that you would rather not be doing. You'd rather do this passion thing. So I always say, what's the alternative? Don't get caught up in the bad days and go, this isn't going to work. If the alternative is 5 days a week, oh, I'm not very happy, make this work,
Yeah.
and make it work with a business model underneath it, with the passion that takes you up in the clouds, and the business model that keeps you grounded, and try your absolute best to replace your day job with your passion, which will then become your day job.
Mm. But thank you so much for really being with me today.
Yeah.
Today in the Living in Alignment podcast, we had Kevin Finn, who is someone I met 2 years ago when we crossed paths at the stage of the design conference. Kevin is a brand expert, author, international recognized branding designer, and a TEDx speaker. His personal belief is that there is wisdom in learning. Kevin has over 30 years of experience, beginning his career in Dublin, Ireland, in a design studio that has created all of U2's album covers. Following this, he was joint creative director of Saatchi's Design in Sydney, part of the Saatchi's and Saatchi's global network. And in 2007, he founded the Zoom Off. Finn lives and works in the Turrbal and Jagera people and acknowledges Australia's first people as the original knowledge holders of this country in Australia, paying respects to elders both past and present. Today, I talked to Kevin about his knowledge, but also how can you give yourself permission? How can you embrace curiosity? I really believe you're going to thoroughly enjoy this episode, and I cannot wait for you to let me know what you thought about it. Enjoy.